You never thought you'd see your own face on a monitor again, let alone one dated 3 years after your funeral. The security footage from Blackwood Asylum plays in grainy black and white, showing you stepping through the rusted gates at precisely midnight. You are wearing the same hospital gown you were buried in, though the fabric looks fresh and unwrinkled. Your reflection in the glass door shows no fear, only a hollow, empty stare that doesn't match your living memories. The timestamp flickers red in the corner, stubbornly displaying a date that shouldn't exist yet. You lean closer to the screen, your breath fogging the cold surface as you watch yourself walk down the long, dark hallway. Every step is heavy, deliberate, like something dragging itself forward against its will. The camera angle shifts slightly, revealing a figure standing at the end of the corridor watching you enter. It's me, sitting in this very chair, watching the recording with a cup of cold coffee. I reach out to pause the video, but my hand passes straight through the screen like it's made of smoke. The figure on the screen turns its head slowly, locking eyes with the camera and smiling a smile that stretches too wide. You realize now that you aren't watching a recording of the past, you are being watched from the future. The plastic joints of the display models don't creak, they snap with the wet sound of breaking bone. I told my supervisor it was just a trick of the shadows, a paranoid lie born from too many nights alone in this dead retail space. But when I flipped the master switch and plunged aisle 4 into darkness, I knew better. I had meticulously arranged them to face the exit, a rigid formation of empty eyes staring at freedom. Yet when my phone flashlight cut through the gloom, every single torso was twisted toward the center of the aisle. They weren't looking out anymore, they were looking in directly at me. I checked my reflection in the glass display case, expecting to see my own terrified face, but the mannequin behind me wore my expression perfectly. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, only to find the plastic figure had rotated fully to stand where I had been standing seconds ago. The air grew cold, smelling faintly of fresh paint and old dust. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, stiff, as if something was locking my joints from the inside out. A low, grinding noise echoed from behind me, the sound of plastic limbs shifting position. I realized then why the store was always so quiet at night. There were no customers left to hear us move. The mannequins weren't facing a different direction because they had moved. They were facing a different direction because I had finally stopped moving myself. The static didn't hiss, it counted down in a voice that sounded like my own. I stood alone on platform 4, where the lights had flickered out 3 years ago and the tiles were stained with something darker than grime. There was no train scheduled for this line, yet the air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and wet iron. The numbers tumbled through the speaker, rapid and desperate, stripping away my sanity with every descending digit. Tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the cracked concrete, paralyzed by a fear older than the city itself. 5 seconds remained, and the darkness at the tunnel's end began to pulse like a dying heart. 4 seconds, and I heard the screech of metal on metal that shouldn't exist in an abandoned station. 3 seconds, and the cold breath of something vast brushed against the back of my neck. 2 seconds left, and I realized with horror that the countdown wasn't warning me away from the danger. 1 second, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream I could produce. The train burst forth from the void, its headlights illuminating not passengers but empty seats facing inward toward the car's center. As the door slid open with a cheerful chime, I saw my own reflection staring back from the glass, mouth moving in perfect sync with the static that had started it all. The static on the monitor didn't look like digital noise, but like ash falling in slow motion against a backdrop of charred timber. I had spent 3 hours digging through my late uncle's storage unit when I found the dusty laptop tucked beneath a pile of mildewed blankets. There was no power source connected to it, yet the screen glowed with a faint, sickly blue light that hummed in the silence of the concrete box. The camera angle was unmistakably from the attic window of the house where I spent my entire childhood before the fire took it all in '95. I watched, paralyzed, as a figure moved across the floorboards below, their silhouette flickering between solid and translucent like a bad signal. It was wearing my favorite red sweater, the one I lost the night the flames started climbing the stairs. My breath hitched in my throat because that sweater had never been recovered from the rubble, yet there it was, draped over shoulders that looked too long for the room. The figure stopped and tilted its head upward, staring directly into the lens with an expression of hollow anticipation. I reached out to close the lid, but my fingers passed through the plastic as if it were made of smoke. The screen didn't go black, instead the image sharpened, revealing the face of the child standing there was mine, aged by decades of waiting. The last thing I saw before the battery died was a timestamp in the corner reading today's date, proving the house never burned down at all. The silence in the abandoned pediatric ward was heavier than the dust that coated every surface. It started on a Tuesday when I found the first porcelain bowl sitting perfectly centered on the crib railing. Inside swirled warm whole milk, untouched by time or temperature. I assumed it was a prank by the security guard, so I dumped it out and warned him off. The next night, another bowl appeared, this one slightly less full. By Friday, the liquid level had dropped halfway, leaving faint, circular ripples that shouldn't have existed in still air. I set up a camera, but the footage only showed static whenever the milk disappeared. Fear turned to curiosity when I realized the bowls were being arranged in a circle around the central play mat. I decided to stay late one night, hiding behind the nurse's station with a flashlight tucked into my belt. As midnight struck, the temperature plummeted and the smell of sour milk replaced the scent of decay. From the shadows between the cribs, a wet slapping sound echoed as something dragged itself across the floor. I held my breath until the noise stopped, convinced whatever was here had left for the night. That's when I saw the fresh bowl placed not on the railing, but directly in front of where I was hiding. The dry rot in the plaster sounded like fingernails scraping against bone, but only after I whispered the name of Timothy Halloway into the dusty air. It wasn't wind rattling the broken window panes or rats nesting in the insulation. It was a deliberate, rhythmic response to the syllables of the dead. I had come to this abandoned schoolhouse seeking closure for a local legend, armed with a list of 7 students who vanished without a trace in 1974. The silence of the hallways was heavy, pressing against my eardrums until I spoke the first name again, louder this time. A sharp screech echoed from behind the wall near the chalkboard, matching the cadence of my voice. Emboldened by fear and morbid curiosity, I moved down the list, reciting each lost child as I walked deeper into the dark classroom. With every name spoken, the scratching grew more frantic, more desperate, as if something was trying to claw its way out to meet me. I reached the final name on my paper, the one that always made the older townsfolk cross themselves and look away. As I whispered Sarah Jenkins, the scratching stopped instantly, replaced by a wet, heavy thud against the interior of the wall. Then came a sound far worse than the scratching, the distinct, wet click of a tongue clicking in anticipation. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness, but I could still hear breathing right beside my ear. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. The elevator chimes for a floor that was demolished decades ago, yet I stepped out anyway. The door slid open to reveal my childhood bedroom, down to the peeling wallpaper and the specific crack in the ceiling plaster. I reached out to touch the dresser, expecting the cold shock of abandoned decay, but the wood felt warm and real under my fingertips. A faint hum vibrated through the floorboards, identical to the radiator noise that used to keep me awake at night. I spun around, desperate for the elevator doors, but they were gone, replaced by seamless beige paint. Panic clawed at my throat as I scanned the room for an exit, finding only the familiar window overlooking the empty lot. On the desk sat a photograph of me sleeping, taken from the angle where I am standing right now. The timestamp on the digital clock read 3 hours into the future, counting down seconds with terrifying precision. I heard the creak of my own bed springs behind me, though no one else was in the room. A whisper brushed against my ear, sounding exactly like my own voice begging for help. I realized too late that the hotel wasn't haunted by ghosts, but by echoes of people who never left this loop. The elevator didn't bring me here, it brought me home to die all over again.